What's up, folks? Coach Ty back at you with another one, and today we've got our hamstring body part guide. As always, we've got the anatomy, my volume recommendations based on the fiber typing of the muscle, and my exercise selection. So here we go. All right, let's get started on the anatomy of the hamstrings. For the most part, we can divide the hamstrings into two separate sections, the lateral and the medial. You actually have four heads in your hamstrings, but the name quadricep was already taken. So in your lateral hamstrings, you have the biceps femoris and the short head, and the medial hamstring has the semitendinosus and the semimembranosus. Both your lateral and medial hamstrings extend your hips and flex your knee, which are the primary two functions that we want to be training for the hamstrings. But also the medial hamstrings, or the hamstrings towards the midline of the body, internally rotate your hip. And the lateral hamstrings on the outside of the body externally rotate the hip. And there is research reflecting that if you perform hamstring curls or hip extensions with your toes pointed outward, so with an externally rotated hip, you will err towards the lateral hamstrings, and if you turn your toes inward slightly, you will train the medial hamstrings. Now, you do need to be careful, especially with the internal rotation, because that can put your knee at an awkward position, but again, something to know. But again, our two main functions that we need to hit are hip extension and also knee flexion. So those are our primary two categories for our exercises in our selection section. I should also note that it seems like leg curls or knee flexion are best for the distal, or the further away from the body. So basically the portion of your hamstring closer to your knee. Knee flexion will err towards that part of your hamstring, and hip extension will err towards the proximal part of your hamstring. So for another reason, we want to have both knee flexion and hip extension movements in our hamstring training. Now, 3 out of our 4 hamstring heads can experience stretch-mediated hypertrophy. The semitendinosus is the head that cannot experience stretch-mediated hypertrophy because it does not also attach at the hip, while the other 3 heads do. This might mean that we want to train our semitendinosus with movements like hip extension, good mornings with a band pulling you backward, any movement in which the forces are at their highest when your hips are extended. Again, the other 3 hamstring heads can experience stretch-mediated hypertrophy, so we want to have movements that exert peak forces when the hamstring is in a very lengthened position. And we can have movements that both serve hip extension and knee flexion that train the hamstrings at very lengthened positions, but we'll come back to that in the exercise section. So moving on to my volume recommendation. So we need to talk about 2 things here, the fiber typing and also voluntary activation. Now, there's some debate in regards to the fiber typing, but for the most part, we find that the fiber typing of the hamstrings is moderate to fast. Also, the hamstrings have extremely high levels of voluntary activation, making it pretty easy to damage regardless of its more moderate fiber typing. Because of this, the hamstrings are going to recover more slowly than most of your lower body muscles. So we need to train them a little less frequently than we would the quadriceps or calves, for example. However, the hamstrings do not recover as slowly as, say, the pecs, triceps, and biceps. So we want our volume to be somewhere between the quadriceps and the pecs. Another thing that I consider in regards to the volume that I'm doing for my hamstrings are the movements that I'm doing. Movements that put the hamstring through a very long range of motion, and also movements that exert peak forces when the hamstring is in a lengthened position will induce more muscle damage. So this is something that we have to consider. Also, again, because of what I said earlier about the anatomy, the majority of our movements are going to be ones that train the hamstrings through long ranges of motion and ones that have stretch-mediated hypertrophy in mind. So because of that, I'm gonna give you an even slightly lower amount of volume to do for your hamstrings. So I would recommend 2 to 4 sets per session, between 4 and 10 reps per set, and between 2 and 4 sessions per week. Moving on to our exercise selection. So first, Barbell good morning, and we're starting with our hip extension movements. Now, this one is a personal favorite of mine because you're training the hamstrings at very long lengths, and you want to push your hips back while leaving your knees mostly extended until you feel a stretch, and then force your hips back forward. And again, you're looking for a stretch on this exercise. I would keep the reps a little bit on the lower side on both that one and this one as well, Romanian deadlift. So Romanian deadlift and good morning, essentially the same movements. The only difference is, of course, where you're holding the barbell at. Now, it can be easier to just hold the barbell here, or like me, I've just grown accustomed to the good morning over the years, so I actually personally prefer that one. But again, essentially the same exercise. And again, also, you're looking for what feels like a stretch through your hamstring. That's the end of your range of motion, and at that point, push your hips forward. Now, I'm going to show you how to rig up a glute ham raise in a gym that does not have a glute ham developer. So you'll use a Smith machine, load it up with quite a bit of weight, grab yourself a yoga mat or a hip thrust pad and a box. This can be a pain in the ass to set up, but I do think it's worth it. And at the top, go ahead and throw a band looped across the top. Get your feet underneath, and then from there, grab your band. Now, I love this exercise because the resistance curve is excellent. The further down you go, the more taut the band gets, so the more assistance you get. And as you come up, the less assistance you get. So you're weakest in that bottom position, which works great because, again, you are getting the most assistance down there and stronger as you come back up, which again is perfect because you're getting less and less assistance the further up you come. And again, if you don't have a glute ham developer, this is a way to make one in your gym. And this is just a normal glute ham raise using the same thing. Now, I didn't have a glute ham developer when I was making this video, or I would have included that exercise or that machine in here. But again, even though this takes a little bit of time to set up, I personally think it's worth it. The glute ham raise is one of the best hamstring exercises that you can do for your knee health and also for your hamstring growth. Next, seated ham curl. You see me pointing Montana's toes up toward the ceiling. There was a recent study that came out while I was making this video. I discovered it that showed that pointing the toes upward helps with hamstring activity. This is because you are basically taking your calves out of the movement, and the calves and the hamstrings act in conjunction to flex your knee. And much like with the glute ham developer we set up a minute ago, the seated hamstring curl is a rare machine, and most of the gyms I've been to don't have one. So here is how you set one up at your gym. So put your cable anchor, I don't even know what to call it actually, at about eye level. Throw on an ankle attachment and sit on a bench. Now try to lean a little further forward to get more stretched at the hips, and then flex and extend. Boom. All right, folks, that's it for the hamstring guide. I hope that was helpful. I've got 2 more videos in the corners for you, so check those out when you can. And let me know what you want to hear from me next. Please like, comment, subscribe, and share, and I will see you with the next one. Deuces.